DIY Duke here. Welcome to Welding Basics, or as a college class, Welding 101. Okay, let's go ahead and do roll call for class today. Billy? All right, so what we're going to learn here today is the basics of welding. And we're going to go ahead and get started with first showing you the welders. And you know what? I'm all about hands-on, get right to it, get your feet wet and get going. None of this book learning and all that kind of stuff. We're going to get right to the action. You ready, Billy? Good. Let's talk about welders first of all. The first one we're going to show here is the Weld Pack 100 by Lincoln. It's a pretty cheap welder. Buy it new for $250, but you can get it cheaper on Craigslist or the thrifty ads or whatever for sometimes it's like $75. And a lot of those welders are really good, even though it can use 115 volts. So you can plug it into any standard household current and you'll be able to weld. Another nice thing about it is you can buy flux cord wire, which this actually has in it right now. It's gasless wire, so you don't have to use it with a bottle of CO2 or CO2 argon. That's what we're going to show is the flux cord wire. And two, a really easy thing is each welder comes with an identifying suggested settings for welding. And it'll go by the thickness of the steel. Say you want to weld 12 gauge metal or even 3/16. This welder will even weld up to 1/4 inch. And then you follow this down and it'll describe if we're using gasless flux cord wire, which we are, and we're using 0.35-inch wire, which they sell wire in different thicknesses from down to 0.20, 0.25, 0.30, 0.35, 0.40, or 0.45 and above. Then we'll go across this gauge and see that we need to be in D2, which is the settings on the welder, D and 2. That's the wire speed, and this is the heat setting. And on thicker metals, this will say multiple passes. So it's not a big enough welder to do that thick of metal with one pass. You need to make multiple passes. So we're going to get a couple pieces of metal and weld them. Let's go. Before you start welding, of course, you're going to want to protect yourself. Leather is a really good way to do it, and a welding cap to keep that spatter from getting in your hair. Good gloves, a good helmet. There's the auto shade style and the regular helmet. And then, of course, a good pair of shoes, not tennis shoes, because you'll have that slag that'll drop down. You don't want to burn your feet either. You really tuck that in, too, because you don't want anything coming down your collar. And then, too, you can get, if you want, a pair of welding chaps. Now protect your pants and stuff as well. Really safe that way. Billy, are you getting any of this? Billy, maybe you shouldn't be in this class if you really don't want to learn welding. Okay, first thing we want to do is ground this welder. Find a nice clean place to do that. I use a grinder and ground that off. So that's grounded. And then this is grounded to the table because it's a steel table. That way the electricity will transfer. Then we're going to check out our nozzle. Each welder has a MIG welder has a nozzle, and you can unscrew that. And these are replaceable, as well as these tips. We'll kind of want to check the tip out to make sure it's good. Now, if we were using gas, it would be coming through these holes. But we're not. We're using the flux core, which doesn't require gas. So we're going to put that nozzle back on. And that kind of shows where the tip and the nozzle need to be. Okay, let's talk about stick out. That's the wire coming away from the nozzle, and you're going to kind of want to maintain about 3/8 of an inch, which is pretty normal, and that's what that looks like. So that will go against the steel, and you'll try to keep that consistently as you weld. And then we're going to go ahead and crank this up. We got our wire speed set at 2.5 and our heat set at C. Let's see if it'll strike an arc. Yep, it's good to go, good ground. Back when I learned how to weld, it was on something like this, an old Lincoln DC 225 amp welder, and it was a stick welder. And that's when, and they still use stick welders, of course, and that's just simply using a stick. As the stick goes down, you replace the stick. That's the cool thing about wire feed welding. It uses a continuous roll of wire. But when I first learned, the key word for the welder teacher was oscillation. Oscillation. And that's just simply the moving of the puddle in the weld, and that's what we're going to do. And that keeps that heated puddle moving across the steel and gets the heat transference good, so you bond those two pieces of metal together. It's all about the oscillation and the speed of which you do that. Let's go ahead and do it. The nozzle is starting here with your 3/8 stick out. You're going to strike an arc, and then normally the oscillation works good, but you can also do, in this case I use like U shapes, up and down, bridging between the two metals, and then keeping just slightly ahead of the molten puddle, and just working it slowly. If you go too fast, you'll get a messed up weld. And since we're using flux cord wire, there's a little bit of slag on there that's left. That's a nice part about using CO2 gas. You don't have to chip that off. So we're going to go ahead and chip that off. And underneath, you can see the weld better right there. And you can see the slight U formations in that. And that's a good weld right there. You're not burning too much here or there, and the heat transference is good. And you can see, I don't know if you can see back there, but you can see the penetration marks in there where the metal heated up. And that bonded those two pieces of metal together good. Like say you're making a workout bench and you want to weld it. That's perfect to use this tubing, as well as an incline bench or whatever kind of piece of equipment you want to use if you're making it out of metal. So let's show a bad weld now. Here's a case of too much wire speed, not very good oscillation or movement for the stick out, and then just kind of all over the place without consistent speed. And you end up looking like kind of a junky looking weld. Way different than that one, which is nice and consistent. So, I mean, it's welded, but it's not that good a weld. So, again, slow and easy, consistent, and check your gauges on your wire feed welder to see which kind of wire speed and what kind of heat you need to be. And really, that's pretty simple welding. And of course, the more you do it, the better you get at it. This stuff's really cool too if you get some for your MIG welder. It's called MIG dip, and your nozzle will get hot. You'll dip it in this stuff. It looks like Vaseline or whatever, and it coats that tip, and it helps keep the splatter from collecting, especially if you're using the flux cord wire like we were using. That doesn't require the shielded gas, but it's on the wire itself. But that'll keep that tip and nozzle really clean, and so you don't get that buildup of spatter. Pretty tough day welding, huh, Billy? Well, you did good. I mean, if Billy can do it, anybody can. Welding's not that hard. Just start simple, work your way up, lots of practice. Practice makes perfect. DIY Duke. Stay tuned for next time. Hey, you can't smoke in here. Put it out.
Tap, Billy, tap.
Do it yourself, Duke.